Why is it so hard to treat addiction?
That's a great question. I think that the biggest challenge with addiction is that people don't understand what it is. As an addiction psychiatrist, I've studied this for quite some time, and I've always been fascinated by the misunderstanding around this term. And for many, many years, addiction has, many decades actually, starting in probably all the decades prior to about 1980, 1990s, addiction was thought of as a disease that people didn't have a choice in. And that, like a physical illness, basically, that you are born with it, born with like a likelihood of being addicted, and that's what happens to you. And that's just it. Sorry, you're stuck. And I think that there's been a number of publications that are huge, major publications starting in the 80s and then progressing forward through Carl Hart's work at Columbia and a number of other famous drug scientists that have demonstrated that's clearly not the case, and that there is choice in addiction, and that what addiction really is it is learned behavior to avoid discomfort. If you can understand, we see this all the time because when we treat people who are struggling with addiction or substance use disorder, and addiction is not limited to substances, by the way, it could be video games, sex, work, smartphones, you name it, right? It could be anything, gambling. These are not drugs. But why do people become addicted to them? Because they're using that behavior, and they've been taught over the years to use that behavior to avoid discomfort. So the main reason why people struggle with treating addiction is because we're not talking about it this way. We're not talking about what it actually is. And when we start to uncover, not focus on the addiction behavior itself, but actually uncover through conversation, why is it that you use X substance or X behavior? Then what we find out from talking to people by asking the right questions is that people are doing X behavior using X substance to cover up pain and to cover up discomfort. And so when you start to uncover the pain, the trauma, what's lurking beneath the surface, that's when you start to get to the root cause of the illness. And that's when people actually start to be empowered with choice again.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was on my show or if I heard it somewhere else from you, but I think you said something like people who become addicted to drugs in many cases have a problem with instant gratification. Like it's it's their ability to not like say no in the short term, like let the ride through the pain so that their life can get better like for the long term. Given what you just said, I mean, I've heard this before that essentially addiction is just wrongful pain management. And it's just, people are just using a substance as a way to escape pain in a way that's not going to be good for them long term. But over the years, you have heard that addiction is a disease. And you hear people say, well, whenever I have a sip of like alcohol, I have to drink like 4 bottles. Or if I take a line of Coke, I can't just put it away. I have to snort like a quarter ounce or something. Are there cases like that where people just have this, they're just more prone to just going all out on substances? Or do you think that their ability to do something like that is because of learned behavior?
Yes, to the first question, there are certain people who have or act with less control in those situations. At the same time, what you ended that with, which is the learned behavior piece, is exactly what's going on. And the reason why we know that now is because Dr. Eric Kandel, who's one of the most famous neuropsychiatrists of our time, who's probably like 96 now, he won the Nobel Prize in 2000 for discovering how we learn and remember stuff. And that the way we learn and remember things as humans dates back to ancient sea snails from over 300 million years ago. And it's the same neural pathway. It's hardwired neural pathways around fear learning and safety learning. And Carl Hart, who I mentioned earlier, and a number of other leading neuroscientists and researchers in this area have done some incredible work showing that when you take people off the street who would be under any circumstances classified as these folks you just described, who they taste cocaine or alcohol and then they binge, right? Because they don't have control. You take those people and you put them into a safe environment and you give them $1 every time, or $5 or a gift card they get later every time they don't use, and you offer them $5 later that accrues every time they don't use, or lab grade pure drugs, like the best drugs you can possibly get. Most of those people in the safe environment actually choose the money. They choose the delayed gratification. Why? Because they feel safe. They feel safe enough to make a different choice. On the street, in the environment filled with stress, in the environment filled with challenge, making that choice becomes a lot harder. It's easier to avoid the immediate discomfort of the stress than it is to say, I'm going to take my chances on the delayed gratification when you don't know it's coming. But when your environment is safe, all of a sudden, your window of opportunity widens and your tunnel vision disappears. And you start to be able to say, oh, wait, if I don't take this drug right now, I could be that much wealthier later. And I know that that's going to happen because I trust these people and I feel safe. And I've signed an agreement saying that this is what I'm going to get. And all of a sudden that safety unlocks the opportunity to make different choices. And so I think this is really the key, is that it's not about there being certain people or kinds of people that are more likely to choose and to binge on drugs. All of us are susceptible to that behavior if we are put in unsafe environments for sustained periods of time. All of us, every human. What's different about the modern understanding of addiction is that we can relearn safety. And simply by relearning safety and having more safety in our environment, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual safety, to be ourselves and to feel safe in our own bodies, then that in and of itself opens up the opportunity to make different decisions. It's like Robert Frost said, to choose the road less traveled. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, you're talking about safety, and I think your example makes sense. If you take somebody who's homeless, who clearly is not safe, and they put them in a safe environment, they're going to be less likely to want to use something to make them feel safe because they're already safe. But I'm wondering, like, if as a society we've gotten weaker and our definition of safety has changed, because there's a lot of people that make a lot of money and that have great families and have a great career that still are going out and like using copious amounts of drugs. So I'm wondering, where are people like that feeling unsafe?
Well, a lot of those people feel unsafe because they don't trust themselves. They don't believe they're worthy of love. They don't believe that, they don't know in their hearts that they are loved unconditionally. And so what do? They seek the feeling of love externally from substances or activities that activate that same reward center in the brain, right? The brain is complex, of course, but it's not as complex as we make it out to be when you can break it down to the basic core functions that Eric Kandel discovered, which is fear and safety learning, right? So the thing is that the brain is an automation machine. It's the fanciest automation machine learning algorithm that we will ever encounter in our lives. The more that you practice anything, this is what Eric Kandel discovered, right? That what our parents told us when we were kids is true. Practice makes perfect. The more you practice doing anything, the better you get at it. If you practice thinking about yourself from the perspective of self-gratitude and self-love and self-forgiveness and self-compassion, then you get better at strengthening those feelings. If you practice thinking about yourself as, I'm not worthy of love, or there's something wrong with me as a person, that I don't feel good. Maybe there's nothing wrong with you as a person, but you just think that, then you are more likely to take the impulsive action of doing something that numbs you or distracts you to that feeling. And so because it's a painful feeling to feel like you're not worthy of love, or to not worthy of affection, or you're not accepted by your community. Even if you make a lot of money, it's still painful to think about that, if that's something that you were taught as a child. And so if you're bullied in school, for instance, right, that can incite that thought process for people for the last of their whole lives. So impulsive behavior, to the contrary of self-gratitude practice, for instance, impulsive behavior trains the brain to be more likely to engage in more impulsive behavior. That's addiction.
And so I guess if you break it down to its core, it comes down to a lack of worthiness, lack of security, a lack of loving oneself. And so when you try a substance like cocaine, which completely hijacks your dopamine system and makes you feel like you're on top of the world. It's giving you this massive influx of quote unquote love, security, feeling good about yourself. And then when that goes away, you're kind of still stuck with yourself. And you're like, crap, I don't love myself still, even after doing this drug. So now I need more. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it gets worse as you use because the source of the problem is not being addressed. The problem is still there. I still don't love myself. I still don't feel worthy enough. I still don't feel accepted, but I'm numbing myself to that feeling or distracting myself to that feeling by artificially stimulating that part of the brain. With cocaine, it's a great example because cocaine is artificially stimulating that same reward center that gets activated when you get a hug. If you got more hugs, if you got more physical affection, you would want cocaine less. Opiates are the opposite example, equally addictive potential by numbing the parts of your brain. Same with benzodiazepines, Xanax, Ativan, Valium, alcohol. They all work in the same way by numbing the part of the brain that senses feelings and emotions. So there's two kinds of addictive behavior. There's distraction from discomfort and numbing to discomfort. And so they're equally dangerous in that way.
So you mentioned that there's two types of addictions. There's numbing discomfort and distracting yourself from discomfort. Like as in your career as an addiction psychiatrist and the work that you're doing now, what are people hiding from?
I mean, they're hiding from these feelings, right? They're hiding from feelings. If you think about, I don't know, did you ever have experiences growing up where there were certain emotions that you were told are not okay to feel?
I mean, yeah, I think as a young man, you're told you can't, cry. You can't be like super angry. You got to like tough it up, stuff like that. But I wasn't thinking about it a lot. I just think I just lived my life and then I just did drugs and it numbed the pain. And that just became like a normal. It wasn't like I was like sitting in my room being like, well, I can't feel my emotions today, or I'm not allowed to feel my emotions. So let's just go get high. It was more like, that's just what I did.
Right. Yeah. It's not necessarily a conscious thought process, meaning that you might have been told, like almost every young man growing up in America, myself included, that, crying, expressing sadness, grief, not okay, especially publicly. It's not okay to be angry. You could scare people, right? Those feelings being told they're not okay ends up creating a learned process of, if this feeling isn't okay, I need to suppress it. And so we consciously we consciously first as children and then unconsciously over time teach ourselves to suppress those feelings or not feel those feelings. Here's the problem though. Catch 22, right? Those feelings are still there. They never go away. There will always be things that make us angry and frustrated. There will always be things that make us sad and want to cry. So when those feelings come up, what happens underneath the surface is there's a part of us that says, whether we are aware of it or not, maybe there's something wrong with me that I feel this way all the time, right? And you might not even notice, we might not even notice that thought process is happening. But as we start to experience those feelings more and more, we start to have that thought process occur. I'm feeling this way, but I was told I'm not supposed to. So what's wrong with me that I feel this way all the time? And that is what ultimately leads people to become uncomfortable with those feelings. But like those feelings are not always supposed to feel good. Not all feelings are supposed to feel good. They're just supposed to be felt. And that's the core work that we do in therapy, is to combat trauma and depression and anxiety, addiction, is about really starting with just feeling your feelings. And when you start to feel your feelings and know that it's just okay to feel your feelings, even if they might be uncomfortable in the moment, it's just that process of saying, I'm going to feel this right now, even though it hurts a little bit or a lot, that allows that feeling to be felt, processed, and then exited through the body, either through physical movement, through conversation, through writing, whatever it is that you need to do, playing music, right? There's all these things that we do to cope with those negative, unpleasant, uncomfortable feelings, but they still have to be felt. And it's the suppression of feeling, which our society condones at large, is the suppression of uncomfortable feelings, is what leads people to then take substances or engage in certain destructive behavior that results in the systematic suppression of more feelings that then leads to addiction, because those feelings are still there. They still need to be felt. They still need you to process them.
Yeah, I want to get back to this feelings conversation, but talking about preparation, don't you think it's just as important, if not more important, for our school system and education system to teach kids how to manage stress? I talk to kids about like hard times in life and how to deal with stuff, because at the root of, I mean, you're saying, at the root of addiction, and your expertise and what you've learned, it's the ability, it's the inability to manage pain, right? And the inability to sit through discomfort. And so in life, it's going to be very uncomfortable and many times for everyone. And so I don't know the answer to this. I'm not a parent, but I mean, after talking to different experts, they've really, expressed the importance of this, of like, we're not, and again, I haven't been in grade school in a long time, so I don't know exactly what they're teaching now, but I would hope that is something that is either part of it now or going to be part of it in the future, because, right now it's clear that people are having a hard time like dealing with life in a productive way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The issue is that it's actually going the opposite direction than you suggest, which is that children in the current generation, like what we might call Gen Z or whatever is, newer than Gen Z, these children are actually getting less tolerant to discomfort than we were, because they are growing up with parents who don't understand that when their kids are stressed out and they're in their youngest ages, they're crying, they're upset, whatever it is, parents don't realize how dangerous it is to hand them a phone or an iPad, right? They don't understand that when you do that, what you're doing is you're handing your child a tool that is supposed to be used thoughtfully, and it's a very powerful tool. You're handing them it for distraction from discomfort. And that's how they use it at that age. And if you teach kids to do that when they're uncomfortable, or you do that yourself as a parent, and you model that for your children, then your children watch you and they see you're uncomfortable and upset. They're like, I want that, right? And children are like sponges. They just suck up everything that their parents do, because everything they see that their role models do, because they whether they admit it or not, they respect their parents. Their parents are like the model. If a parent does something, then kids want to do it. And so, that's not that complicated. It's just how most children work, generally speaking. And so the contrary to that is actually what happens in Eastern cultures and in tribal cultures, and in some cases in certain parts of Europe, where they've now implemented meditation, breath work, and mindfulness and yoga techniques for children. And when you think about what that does, you can teach a kid to breathe before they learn to speak. Okay, so think about that. You can teach a kid to breathe by choice before they learn to speak. And if you do that by just showing them, so you just say, hey, it looks like you're upset right now. Let's just take a breath together. And then they might not even be able to communicate with you with words fully in full sentences, but you just do breathe in, breathe out. And then you just say, hey, do what I do. Breathe in, breathe out. And then guess what happens? Within like 1 to 2 minutes, child stops crying, they calm down, they start to realize they're in control of how they feel. Not, I need to distract myself from my feelings. They start to become in touch with their feelings. And so it's really the teaching that we need to embrace in Western culture is not upset child, hand them a screen. It's upset child, teach them how to breathe. And as soon as you do that, that's what starts the process of learning to tolerate discomfort. Because discomfort in like 99% of cases, it's not going to kill you or hurt you. It just doesn't feel good. So teaching discomfort tolerance is actually the goal, but we're not doing a very good job of that in Western culture. And that's what needs to change. And it just starts with understanding how simple the process is and then modeling it for your children.
Is there any data that you've seen out about the effects of like things like social media on kids' brains or on adults' brains?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, and I think there's a lot of debate around how damaging or helpful it is because the studies are a bit hard to do. They're a bit hard to interpret. You know, social media screens are not inherently bad. I'm going to be the last person to tell you that any drug or any, anything, activity, screen, social media is inherently bad. So if you think about how we need to rethink education around these tools, it's really about how we use them. So handing your kid a screen when they're upset to distract themselves from being upset because it makes you as the parent feel better is not the right solution to the problem. It makes it worse. It actually trains bad behavior and discomfort intolerance. If you instead wait for the child to be a little bit older and then hand them a screen, not when they're upset, but when they want to build relationships with their friends, as one example, or they want to learn something about the world, right? Like, why is the internet and smartphone, why are they so cool? Because you can learn anything instantaneously. When you and I grew up, we had to go to the library. We had to look up in the cards where to find a book on something we wanted to learn. It could take hours just to find the thing that you wanted to learn about. Now you have it in your pocket, supercomputer with all the information in the world. If we teach kids how to use that tool properly, intentionally, with thought, with intention, then they become able to use these tools for expanding and enhancing the quality of their lives and the lives of everyone in their community around them. That is the constructive way to think about it. That's not how most people use these things.
And so, what does the path of addiction look like to you? You mentioned that it's a series of learned behavior. Like, what is it doing to the reward center of the brain? What's it doing to the brain when you first start using a substance to check out or to escape discomfort? And then when's like the breaking point where then the brain is completely like addicted and now your life just gets completely turned around?
That second question, we don't necessarily know the answer to yet. The first question about what happens kind of helps explain why. So, what it does to the brain when we learn to take something from the outside to make us feel better on the inside is that it trains us to believe that we need things from the outside to feel good on the inside. So that's the slippery slope. If we're talking about learned behavior, right, going back to why Eric Kandel's work is so important, this Nobel Prize winning work from 2000, it's so important because if you learn, whether you're an adult or a child, that you don't know how to make yourself feel better on the inside when you're uncomfortable, so you need to take something from the outside, then what you're teaching yourself every time you do that is, I don't have what I need here to feel good. I need something from out here. That is not actually true. The truth of the matter is that we all have everything we need right now inside to feel good. That is what people need to learn from a very young age. And you can learn it at any age. That's the good news. But if you continue down the path of believing and practicing the behavior that reinforces the belief system that, hey, I actually don't have what I need here, I need it from out there, it doesn't matter what it is from out there. It could be ice cream, it could be food, sugar, drugs, video games, gambling, earning money, sex, whatever. I need that to feel good. I can't just feel good by myself through my own will, my own choice, my own power. Then you're disempowering your own ability to heal yourself and feel good. That's eventually, once you train yourself to do that enough, you forget completely that you have the ability to do that inside, that you have what you need. So to answer your second question, it's when you forget that you have what you need here, that thought is gone from your brain, that you have what you need here to feel good and to tolerate discomfort and stress. That is when people get to a point where addictive behavior becomes really, really destructive and really hard to come back from and takes much longer to recover from. It doesn't mean you can't recover from it. It means we need to help you revise your belief system again and remember that you have everything you need right here. And this leads into why psychedelic medicines, like the work with ibogaine that Dr. Nolan Williams is doing, that's so fundamentally important, is because when you look at how psychedelic medicines work with psychotherapy, the core of that work, regardless of what drug you're talking about, comes down to one thing, which is that the these psychedelic drugs, when used properly in the safe container of guidance and therapy, amplify the neural pathways around self-generated safety. And when you feel like you can trust yourself and feel safe enough in your own body to trust yourself again, then all of a sudden you remember, oh, wait, I do have everything I need right now. I don't need anything from out here to make me feel better. Even though I took this drug to remind me, the drug's just reminding me of a natural state I can access on my own.
So this episode is brought to you by the Zona Plus, the ultimate biohack. The Zona Plus continues to be the biohacker's choice for full-body cardiovascular conditioning. The Zona Plus uses the proven science of isometric therapy to help increase overall cardiovascular fitness. And the cool thing about Zona is it guides the user through a simple yet precise isometric exercise, which helps to encourage multiple functions in the body, which can help improve overall cardiovascular function. And the cool thing is it only takes 12 minutes a day, 5 minutes per week. And like I said earlier, the Zona Plus uses the science of isometrics and combines a hand grip exercise with a series of algorithms that can help activate the body's parasympathetic response, which is responsible for functions such as heart rate and cardiovascular fitness. It is the ultimate biohack, which I think you will really like. So right now, you can try the Zona Plus risk-free for 90 days. And if you use the code Doug100 at checkout, you get $100 off the Zona Plus device. So go to Zona.com and use the code Doug100 for $100 off and try the Zona Plus risk-free for 90 days. I think a lot of times what happens is before people, start using a substance, I look at the easy example is like somebody who goes to college, joins some sort of fraternity, and then just goes out and parties all the time. And I'm not saying that all fraternities do this, but just for this example, I would like to use this. And then they have no idea the power of these substances, or they have no idea that they're subconsciously masking all this pain. And then it becomes too late. Now you got somebody who's partied for 4 or 5 years. That's become now a super learned behavior. They're in the thick of addiction and they don't know how to get out. So I guess my question is, like, how does somebody know if they have the potential to like fall down this slippery slope? I know you mentioned that if you're somebody who hides your feelings, but a lot of times, like I said at the beginning, people aren't like walking around like checking in with themselves about how what their feelings are like, especially if their life isn't bad. So how can somebody navigate that so that they don't like engage in in one of these learned behaviors that will completely destroy their life?
So it's a great question. So I think that the first answer is that, and this is kind of, I hope this is humbling for everyone and not discouraging, but when we understand how we learn and remember stuff around fear and safety, which was again going back to Candel's work, and we think about how those nervous system pathways around fear and safety learning date back to ancient sea snails, hundreds of millions of years older than us, it helps us understand that these systems are hardwired around these kinds of learnings, and that there's not, that's why it's called the reptilian brain. That's like that primitive fear-based brain that is like, I'm afraid, avoid, distract, numb, get to safety. Oh wait, I'm supposed to be safe, but I still don't feel safe. Avoid, distract, numb, right? And so that is where it starts. And if you understand that this is highly evolved, but that we are that core of our nervous system is the same as pretty much every animal around fear and safety, then what you can interpret from that is that every single human being, and from animal studies, probably every animal, has the ability or has the potential to become addicted to things. Every single human. It is not certain people that only can struggle with addiction. It's that if you have the wrong set of circumstances in your life, you're taught the wrong behaviors as a kid, you're exposed to the wrong kinds of role models as a kid, or you've had a lot of childhood trauma, or whatever it is, then that recipe can increase the likelihood for sure. If your parents or your grandparents experience severe trauma, your chances of becoming addicted to a substance to numb yourself to pain increases. So there's certain people who are more likely to develop addiction behavior, but everyone can become addicted to something and develop addictive behavior. So that's kind of where it starts. And from there, it's if you can understand that that is true based on the way that the nervous system works and modern neuroscience, then you can understand also that everybody has the capacity to heal from these things. So it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, and I do think that people also need to get better at embracing like discomfort in the moment, because I do think that while I shared, like, it's not like people, it's not like people are walking around being like, how am I feeling today? And then if it's like, oh, I feel bad. Why am I feeling bad? Let me just go do something to make this go away. I think it's more like people are just stressed and they're anxious, or they feel alone or whatever. And they don't want to think about those feelings at all. So they just go and they just do what they're used to. So what are some best practices? You talked about meditation, for kids to embrace discomfort. What are some like best practices for like adults that just have a hard time like dealing with life, and their go-to is typically just to do something to escape, whether it's substance related or non-substance related? Like what can they do to calm themselves in a productive way?
So it's the same techniques. Same for kids, same for adults. Obviously, adults have more advanced knowledge of the world than children in a lot of ways, I would hope. Not always the case, but my wife has this phrase that I really like, which is adults are just like big babies. We have all the same basic needs, wants, and desires. We need to be fed. We need air. We need water. We need shelter. We need comfort, love, and acceptance by our community. That doesn't change when you become an adult. It's still there. You still need hugs. You still need affection and acceptance as an adult. What happens when you get hugged? What happens when you hug yourself or tell yourself, I love you, or thank you for getting me here today, right? What happens is that you increase the same neurotransmitters naturally that get released when you use different substances. Why did social isolation during COVID result in such a dramatic increase in substance abuse, like levels higher of substance abuse than existed before COVID? Because with social isolation, there's less authentic, genuine human connection and touch. People were literally socially isolated. When you're socially isolated, you get less oxytocin, you get less dopamine, you get less serotonin, you get less endorphins, natural reward hormones. You get less endogenous opioids that get released when you get hugged, natural pain relieving hormones, less endocannabinoids, right? The natural molecules that are anti-inflammatory in the body. Notice how endocannabinoids, when we don't have enough of the natural cannabinoids we make ourselves, what do? We seek them from the outside, right? When we don't have enough opiates that we make ourselves in our own body, what do? We seek them from the outside, right? And so it's really that simple. And so when you start to think about this in that way, what makes it better is just awareness to start. Awareness is always the first step. It's just noticing your feelings and noticing your behavior. And if you notice your feelings without judging yourself, critical caveat, because many of us were taught to judge ourselves very harshly, usually more harshly than other people judge us, then we can't actually process the feeling if we are judging it as bad before we've even felt it. It's like you have an inkling of sadness or anger or frustration, and we're automatically like, that's bad. I don't want to feel that right now. I'm at work. I'm with family. I can't feel that. It's not, oh, I'm feeling sad. I need to cry. I'm going to go take some time to myself and go cry it out, right? That is not acceptable as a man in our society. This is not. Like, should it be? Yes, absolutely, but it's not. And so how do we fix it? Is we make it acceptable and mainstream to feel your feelings and to do the practices that allow you to expand your awareness and feel your feelings more. So that's the like intentional breathing, just directing your attention to your breath rather than letting your body just do it automatically all the time, which it can do. But if you do it automatically all the time, then the environment is dictating how you breathe, not you dictating how you breathe. When you dictate how you breathe, when you dictate how you're touched, when you dictate what you're listening to rather than the environment deciding, you have just restored control and reminded yourself that you're in control of what's coming in and how you feel. And as soon as you've done that, guess what? You've eliminated the source of anxiety. Anxiety in and of itself comes from, at the core, spending time paying attention to things we don't have control over. Think about that, right? The more time we spend thinking about things we don't have control over, the more out of control we feel. What is the source of anxiety? It's feeling uncertain, feeling out of control. Because in the jungle, if in 50,000 years ago in ancient human cultures, which we have the same nervous system as they did, if they were exposed to uncertainty, uncertainty could mean immediate death, right? So that is not the case now, but we're also surrounded by that much more uncertainty now. The news, responsibilities, emails, work things, whatever, like the list is huge, right? So it's really recognizing that when you do techniques that soothe the body and increase the vagus nerve activity, which is the core nerve of our recovery nervous system, it reminds us we're not actually under threat. The breathing, the yoga, meditation, mindfulness, touch, soothing music, soothing is good. Pleasure is good. Natural pleasure, right? And when you do that and you embrace that, that's when your body starts to unlock its ability to heal itself. And that's when you start to be able to fix a lot of this stuff.
Last question I want to ask you is about like long-term recovery from like substances, getting back to what we were talking about before, and that if somebody like wants to abstain from substances, they just can't. They found that they're destroying their lives with substances. What are some basic principles that you think everyone should adhere to in order to abstain, in order to be able to stay in recovery long term?
It's a good question. I think, a lot of it starts with awareness, like we were talking about earlier, which is just like noticing the behavior patterns that result in you wanting to use a substance. So like asking yourself genuinely, without judgment, just be like, I have this urge to use alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, cocaine, opiates, list, whatever, right? I have an urge, I feel right now, to use that thing. The first step is rather than just going to impulsively to that thing and using it and just doing it without thinking, ask yourself, why do I want to use that right now? And then the answer will almost always come to you immediately, because that's how our bodies work. And the answer will come to you immediately. And the answer will usually be something to the effect of, I want to use this because, for most people, to avoid, distract, or numb myself to X feeling or situation. And if that's the case for you in that situation, go do something else. Go for a run. Go for a walk. Go hang out with a loved one. Go do something that naturally helps you cope with that unpleasant feeling that you're trying to avoid, or the unpleasant situation you're trying to avoid. Don't just numb yourself to it, because ultimately what happens is, if you, like we were talking about earlier, if you keep numbing yourself or distracting yourself from the feelings will still be there when you come back, and they might even be bigger and more painful. Usually they are. So it's asking the right questions at the right times that help us to expand our awareness. Don't just go down the same path every time without thinking about it. So and this is how psychotherapy works. The whole concept of psychotherapy as a practice is just about broadening your awareness a little bit to understand, hey, I've been making the same choice over and over and over again. for days, weeks, months, years, decades, right? Where does that choice lead? Oh, I know where that choice leads. It leads me to spending all my money and then alienating my friends and family, and it leads to loneliness. Is that what I want? No, probably not. I actually want to be closer to people. So what are the choices I can make to achieve that goal? And you can see like my line of thinking, right? This is a natural line of thinking that just by asking the right questions at the right times of why am I wanting to use this thing right now, you open up the window of opportunity to make different choices. That is what restores your power.
Well, Dr. Rabin, this has been awesome. Wanted to thank you again for coming back on the show and like this deep dive on addiction and all the things. If people want to learn like more about your work, where can they do that?
Lots of places. If you want to learn about this kind of stuff that we're talking about here, I have two shows on Spotify and iTunes, Apple Podcasts. One is called Your Brain Explained, which is about how your brain works and consciousness in general. And the other one is called The Psychedelic Report, which is about the latest news in the psychedelic scene and how psychedelics work. And then if you want to find me on socials, which I love to hear from you, at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to find me for clinical work in my practice or learn about Apollo, check out drdave.io or apollo.clinic or wearablehugs.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.